This happened 2 years ago when I was 25. Back then, my life felt stuck and heavier than I could admit, and I used to escape to my family's rural property, a small, isolated farmhouse deep in the countryside. Nobody lives there full-time anymore. It used to be my grandfather's place, but after he passed, the house stayed exactly as it was. We only visited occasionally for storage, maintenance, or holidays. I always thought the place was peaceful. A quiet kind of silence that made you feel like the world had stopped moving for a while. I went there to rest, to clear my head, to breathe. But that weekend changed everything I believed about being alone. I arrived late on a Saturday afternoon. The sun was dropping behind the trees, the fields were glowing orange, and the air smelled like wet grass and cold wood. The house looked the same from the outside. One story, peeling wooden windows, a sagging porch that groaned every time you stepped on it. Inside, the air was stale and dusty, like a place paused in time. I set my backpack on the table, opened a few windows, checked the water tank, tested the generator, and made sure no animals had found a way inside. That was my usual routine, and everything felt normal. I made instant coffee, sat in the kitchen, and listened to the countryside. No cars, no nearby houses, no voices, just insects and the distant wind across the fields. The first strange thing happened around 7 p.m. I was wiping the counter when I heard a slow, heavy step coming from above me. The farmhouse doesn't have a second floor. It's a one-story house. I froze, listening for another sound, but the house went completely silent. I tried to tell myself it was just the roof cooling after the heat of the day, wood shifting, beams contracting. But something inside me tightened, like a warning I didn't want to recognize. As I walked down the hallway, a cold draft brushed past me. The windows were closed. There was no explanation for it. And the silence outside felt different now, dense, heavy. Around 9 p.m., I went outside to grab firewood, and when I turned back toward the house, I noticed a faint glow in one of the back rooms. I hadn't turned on any lights there. I walked around the side of the house, keeping my flashlight pointed down so I wouldn't be visible from the window. When I got close enough, I peeked in. The room was empty, completely dark except for that glow I'd seen a second earlier. It wasn't the warm tone of a lamp or the flicker of a candle. It looked exactly like the shape of a phone screen lighting up someone's face. But I couldn't see the person holding it. As I stepped closer, the glow snapped off. The room went fully black, like it had never been lit at all. I waited a few seconds, staring into the darkness, trying to convince myself it had been a reflection or a mistake. But I knew what I saw. Someone had been inside that room. I locked the doors when I came back inside. It wasn't fear yet, just uneasiness. The kind that settles in your stomach and doesn't leave. Around 10 p.m., the generator flickered again, and the lantern I had in the kitchen dimmed for a few seconds. The temperature inside the house felt colder, like the walls had absorbed the night. Then I heard footsteps on the porch. Slow, not the creaking of wood shifting. Actual footsteps. They stopped right beside the front window. Then came a new sound. Something brushing along the wooden walls outside. A dragging sound, almost like fingertips moving slowly across the boards. It moved around the entire house. Then again, slower the second time. The lantern flickered harder and shut off completely, plunging the house into darkness. I turned on my flashlight and walked into the living room. When I pointed the beam toward the front window, I saw a quick movement. Someone pulling back, just out of sight. Someone had been standing inches from the glass. That was when I knew I had to leave. Staying inside felt like a trap. I grabbed my backpack, my wallet, my keys, and moved slowly toward the back door, avoiding windows, stepping as quietly as possible. When I reached for the handle, it moved. Someone on the other side gently rattled it. Once, not forcefully, not like they were trying to break in. I stepped backward. Then another step. My pulse was pounding in my ears. I turned and hurried toward the front door. I unlocked it, opened it, and ran. I sprinted across the yard, got to my car, slammed the door, and started the engine. My headlights washed over the front of the farmhouse, and that's when I saw it. A tall, thin figure standing at the corner of the house, half hidden in the shadows. Shoulders hunched, head tilted slightly, arms too close to the body. It didn't move. It didn't run. It just watched me. I tore down the dirt road as fast as the car could handle. The road was uneven and narrow, with tall trees on both sides forming a dark tunnel. Branches scraped the sides of the car. The rearview mirror vibrated from the speed. Halfway down the road, headlights appeared behind me. A car. Someone was following me. They stayed far enough to keep their distance, but close enough to let me know they were there. I held the wheel tightly and pushed the car harder, slipping on gravel and bouncing over dips. When I turned onto the main road, the headlights slowed down and disappeared into the trees, like the driver had simply turned off a side path. I didn't stop. I didn't breathe normally until I reached home. The next morning, after barely sleeping, I drove back with my uncle. I expected to find the house broken into, the doors forced open, something obvious. But everything looked normal. Nothing stolen, nothing moved, except for the back door handle. It was covered in greasy fingerprints, fresh ones. Inside the house, the curtains in the room where I saw the glow were slightly open, as if someone had been watching the yard the night before. Then we checked the side of the house. One of the windows had been forced open from the inside, not broken, not damaged, propped open with a small piece of wood, like someone had prepared a way to enter and leave quietly. Someone had been living in the farmhouse, maybe for days, maybe watching me from the moment I arrived. Later that week, a neighbor told me he had seen an unmarked white pickup parked near the dirt road a few nights earlier. Lights off, no movement inside. It didn't confirm anything, but it didn't need to. I knew I hadn't been alone that night. I've never gone back there alone. I never will. Empty farmhouses aren't always empty. Rural silence isn't always peaceful. And darkness feels different once you realize someone else might be standing just outside, watching and waiting. Because if I had hesitated, if I had opened that door or checked that room, I'm certain I wouldn't be here telling this story. This happened about 2 years ago, when I was 28, and trying to convince myself that a quiet weekend away would fix how burned out I felt. My aunt owns a small farm in the middle of nowhere, the kind with one long dirt road in and out, and fields that look like they go on forever. She and my uncle had taken a last-minute trip to visit my cousin out of state, so they offered me the place for the weekend. "No neighbors for half a mile," she said on the phone. "You'll have the whole farm to yourself. It'll be peaceful." Peaceful sounded good at the time. I got there late Friday afternoon, just as the sun was starting to sink behind the tree line. The farmhouse was old but cozy, with creaky wooden floors, mismatched furniture, and a front porch that wrapped around one side. Out back, there was the big red barn, a smaller equipment shed, and beyond that, fields of corn and soy stretching out into the distance. The air smelled like hay and dirt, and something faintly metallic from the old machinery. My aunt had left a list of instructions on the kitchen table. How to feed the barn cats, which light switches not to touch, what to do if the power flickered during a storm. That last part didn't really register, until the sky went dark. By the time night fell, the entire farm was swallowed in black. There weren't any streetlights, no glow from nearby houses. Just the single porch light, and the occasional blink from a motion sensor over the barn door. I made myself a simple dinner, scrolled my phone for a while, and tried to relax. Around 10 p.m., I went to take a shower. I just stepped into the bathroom when the light flickered once, twice, and then went completely out. "Seriously?" I muttered, feeling around for the switch like that would somehow help. The entire house went dark at the same time. No hum of the fridge, no glow from the microwave display, just the deep, instant silence of a power outage. I checked my phone. barely 1 bar of service. I remembered my aunt's note and found the part about the breaker. If the power goes out, check the breaker box in the barn. Sometimes storms shake the lines. Reset it and everything should come back on. Only there wasn't a storm. The sky had been perfectly clear when the sun went down. Still, I needed power, and the bathroom in the barn was the only other place with running water if something else was wrong with the house. So I grabbed the big flashlight from the kitchen drawer, slipped on my boots, and stepped out into the night. The air outside felt colder than I expected. The farm was so dark it didn't even look real. The only light was my flashlight beam, and that faint motion sensor over the barn door, glowing dull yellow and then clicking off again when it didn't detect anything. The fields on either side of the path looked like black walls. Every now and then, I thought I heard something moving out there. A rustle, a whisper of stalks brushing together. But when I stopped to listen, there was nothing. The barn loomed ahead of me, huge and silent. I pushed the side door open and was hit with the smell of hay, oil, and animals. The flashlight slid across empty stalls and hanging tools. On the far side near the back was a little hallway that led to the breaker room and a small restroom the farmhands used. I headed down that hallway, my boots thudding on the concrete. The bathroom door was half open. Without really thinking about it, I nudged it the rest of the way. I almost walked straight into her. There was a woman standing just inside the doorway, like she'd been about to walk out at the exact same time I was coming in. I stopped so abruptly I nearly dropped the flashlight. She was older than me, maybe late 40s or early 50s, with grayish hair that looked rough and uneven, like it had been cut with a dull knife and then never brushed again. In the harsh beam of my flashlight, her hair almost shone with a greasy sheen. She wore a long, faded coat that reached to her knees, completely wrong for the warm, late summer night, and muddy rubber farm boots. In one hand, she held a crumpled plastic feed bag like it was a purse. None of that would have been that strange on a farm, I guess. What made it strange was the way she looked at me. She didn't flinch. She didn't say, "sorry" or "excuse me," or even seem startled that someone else was there. She just lifted her head slowly and locked her eyes on mine. Her eyes lingered on my face for a beat too long, and then dropped to my flashlight, to my bare legs under my oversized t-shirt, and back up again. I'm sorry, I said, stepping slightly to the side so she could pass. She didn't move. We stood there like that for another second. I could hear my own breathing and the hum of one lone fly trapped somewhere in the barn. The woman finally took a small step sideways, just enough for me to squeeze past her, but her shoulders stayed angled toward me, and I could feel her eyes on the back of my neck when I went by. Trying to act normal, I walked to the sink, set my flashlight down so it pointed up at the ceiling, and pretended to fuss with the faucet just to have something to do. The bathroom was small. 1 sink, 2 stalls, a paper towel dispenser that looked like it hadn't been refilled in a decade. I expected to hear her boots walk past me and out the door. They didn't. Instead, I heard them shift. The sound of rubber scraping against concrete. When I glanced up at the mirror, I saw her in the reflection, standing a few feet behind me, just inside the doorway, her arms hanging straight down at her sides, that plastic bag dangling from one hand. She wasn't washing her hands. She wasn't fixing her coat. She wasn't doing anything. She was just standing there. My throat went dry. I turned off the faucet even though I hadn't really used it and reached for my flashlight. "Sorry, I'll be quick," I said, even though I had no idea why I was apologizing. She didn't answer, not even a nod. Without another word, I stepped into the closest stall and closed the door, sliding the latch with hands that suddenly felt clumsy. The stall was narrow and smelled like old cleaner and damp wood. I sat down mostly just to get my feet off the ground and tried to steady my breathing. The thin gap under the door glowed faintly from my flashlight, which I had left pointing upward by the sink. From where I was, I could see the woman's boots. They were turned toward my stall. They weren't moving. That was the moment I realized I'd left my phone in the house. No way to call my aunt. No way to call anyone. No way to even check the time and see how long I'd been in there. I told myself over and over that it was fine, that this was just some local farmhand or a neighbor using the barn bathroom, that maybe she was socially awkward, that people on a farm were just different than what I was used to. But none of that explained why she was just standing there. Minutes passed. I could hear her breathing, slow and steady, above the faint drip from a pipe somewhere in the wall. I stared at her boots and tried to convince myself I was imagining how strange this all was. Then I heard it, the sound of her boots scraping backward, then turning, the faint squeak as the bathroom door opened. A rush of cooler air brushed under the stall door, and then the heavy thud of the door closing again. Her boots were gone. I let out a long breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding and waited. 10 seconds, 20, 30. The breathing stopped. The bathroom was silent. I told myself she'd left, that I was alone. But something about it didn't sit right. I decided to wait just a little longer just to be sure. That's when I heard it. A second set of footsteps. Softer this time, more careful. Not approaching the stalls, but shifting somewhere near the door. Then, nothing. I strained to listen. The silence stretched out, heavy and thick. No boots, no breathing. Just the faint rustle of the plastic bag. A thought crept in that made my stomach twist. What if she only pretended to leave? The door hadn't slammed, it had just closed. She could have opened it a crack, stepped into the hallway, and then come right back in without fully letting it shut. She could be standing just out of sight against the wall, waiting for me to unlock the stall, waiting for me to step out first. I didn't move. My legs were starting to tingle, but I stayed absolutely still, counting in my head. 1 minute. 2. My sense of time started to blur. All I had was the sound of my own heartbeat thudding in my ears. Then, clear as anything, I heard a long, shaky inhale. Not mine. Hers. It was the sound someone makes when they've been holding their breath and finally have to let it out. Immediately after, the door creaked again, opened wider this time, and then closed with a more definite click. Her boots moved away, this time for real. I could hear them in the hallway, echoing once, twice, and then fading. I waited another full minute just to be sure. When I finally stood up, my knees popped. I unlocked the stall as quietly as I could and pushed the door open an inch. Then another. The bathroom was empty. My flashlight was still on the edge of the sink, shining up at the ceiling. The mirror reflected my face, pale and drawn, hair stuck to my forehead. I grabbed the flashlight and hurried out into the hallway, turning toward the breaker room. I flipped every switch my aunt had marked, and after a moment, I heard the thunk of electricity coming back to life in the house. As I headed for the barn exit, I slowed. The big sliding door at the front of the barn was open a few inches wider than before. Through the gap, I could see a slice of the farmyard, the gravel path, and just beyond the corner of the barn. Her, the woman, was standing at the edge of the light, half in shadow, half in moonlight. She was facing the house like she was studying it. In her free hand, the one that hadn't been holding the plastic bag, there was something long and thin. It caught a brief flash of my flashlight beam and glinted. A tool, I told myself. A small sickle or a hooked knife, the kind you might use to cut down weeds or rope. Perfectly normal on a farm, except she was holding it wrong. Not like a tool, more like a weapon. The blade angled downward, her wrist bent tight. As if she felt me watching, her head turned. Even from that distance, I could tell she was looking right at me. We stared at each other for a heartbeat that felt like a full minute. Then, without a word, she shifted her grip on the metal thing, tucked the plastic bag closer to her side, and walked along the side of the barn toward the back of the property, disappearing into the dark outline of the trees. I didn't wait to see where she went. I ran. Gravel sprayed under my boots as I sprinted back to the house. I slammed the front door, locked it, then locked the back door, the side door, and every window I could reach. The power was back on now, but every light I flipped felt too bright, like it would make me more visible from outside. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped my phone when I picked it up. I tried calling my aunt, but the call didn't go through. The signal was too weak. All I could do was send a short, frantic text. "Is anyone supposed to be here on the farm?" "I saw someone in the barn. She's still out here." The message sat there with the little spinning icon, trying to send. I ended up sitting on the floor with my back against the front door, listening. Every creak made me jump. Every brush of wind against the siding made me think of rubber boots on concrete, of breathing in the dark. About 20 minutes later, though it felt much longer, my phone finally buzzed. "No one should be there. We didn't tell anyone you were coming. Stay inside, doors locked. We're calling the neighbor to check in the morning." The idea of having to make it through the whole night on that isolated farm, knowing there had been a woman in the barn bathroom, pretending to leave, watching the house with a blade in her hand, it made my chest tighten. I didn't sleep. I don't think I even blinked for more than a few seconds at a time. I just sat there listening, waiting for footsteps on the porch or the jingle of the back doorknob. Nothing happened. When the first gray light of dawn started to creep in around the curtains, I finally gathered enough courage to peek out through a gap. The yard looked normal. The barn stood where it had always been. The fields were still. No sign of anyone. The neighbor came over an hour later, a broad-shouldered man in his 60s. He walked the property with his dog, checked the barn, the sheds, the edges of the fields. He didn't find anyone. "She was probably just some drifter," he said when he came back to the porch. Adjusting his cap like that settled it. "People sometimes cut through the back road. Farm looks empty. They try a door or two. You scared her off." I nodded like I agreed. It was the most reasonable explanation. But drifters don't usually stand silently in barn bathrooms, pretending to leave, and then holding their breath so you'll come out first. They don't usually watch houses in the dark with a blade held the wrong way. I cut my weekend short and left that afternoon. I told my aunt I wasn't feeling well, and that the peace and quiet on the farm just wasn't for me. That was true in its own way. To this day, I don't know who that woman was or what she wanted. Maybe she was harmless. Maybe she wasn't. All I know is that, after that night, I stopped romanticizing weekends alone in the middle of nowhere.